Westford is home to many historic houses. One of these houses is the Samuel Fitch House, located on Powers Road. At over 300 years old, the house has a rich history and is an excellent window into the daily life of Westford's early inhabitants.
My name is Lynne Smithwood, and we are at the Samuel Fitch House in Westford, Mass. The house was built in 1711. It still has a lot of the original features. It has the 5 original fireplaces, it has the indoor smoke room, it has the original wide pine floors, open beam ceilings, which is unusual for a house of 300 years old. It was my childhood home. There were 5 other families in the home, which is again unusual to have a 300-year-old house with only 6 families living in it. We opened it as a bed and breakfast because it has a lot of history and we were having a lot of fun with people from all over the world.
The Fitch House was built in 1711 by Walter Powers. He was a minister from the town of Chelmsford. He built a 5-room house. He lived here until 1732, at which time the Fitches bought the house. They lived here for almost 100 years. They called it the Fitch House, and that's the name that was kept.
This was the dining room. I like to start in this room because it has a lot of history. It was used by the Fitches during the Revolutionary War. Samuel Fitch's son-in-law, Francis Layton, who is buried here in Westford, he was the committee man for the town of Westford. So during the Revolutionary War, each town picked a committee man. And for Westford, they chose Francis Layton. So he used this room as a tavern, and he got the committee men from Acton and Littleton and the neighboring towns to get together and talk about how they were going to march into Concord. The other thing that's interesting about this room is that like all the rooms, the original rooms, each room has a fireplace. That was their sole source of heat. They had no electricity. But what's nice about this room is called the Parson's Cabinet. Again, the legend is that they built this little cabinet in order to hide babies during attacks. The historians that have come to the house say, no, that's not where they would have put the babies. That's where they would have put the liquor for the parson. And it's very small, and it probably didn't hold babies. The house is a center chimney saltbox colonial. So each room has a fireplace. There's one chimney up the middle. When Mr. Powers built the house, he built an indoor smoke room. Now, a smoke room is where they would hang their chickens and their pigs and they would smoke them. So what he would do is he would cover the top of the chimney and the smoke would come down into this room. So with a smoke room that was built by the Powers was a luxury. Back in the 1700s, smoke rooms were out by the outhouse. So when people went out to the outhouse, they would fill it with wood, and that's where they would smoke their meat. So this was a luxury for his wife. I think it probably was very messy. This is a door that was put on probably by the Murphys. Now the Murphys were the 3rd family, lived here mid-1800s. You can see that it has the original blown glass. You can see where they cut off the glass. Now, when the house was built, the front of the house from outside, you see there's just a plain panel door, which would have been the kind of door they had in the 1700s. This door would have gone in mid-1800s. A lot of homes from that era would catch on fire because if the house was situated in such a way that the sun got into the little spirals of the glass, it would cause a fire in the house. This was the parlor. And the parlor was used during the 1700s. The parlor was used when the parson came to visit, but this room was used rarely. So it was also used if somebody died. So in the 1700s, people were having reactions to cooking with tinware, and it was acidic reaction. So they would find people that they thought were dead, and in England they were digging up graves and they found a lot of scratches on coffins, and they found that they were burying people alive. So here in the United States, in England, their solution was they put a little bell, and there was a bell keeper in each of the cemeteries. So if you woke up and you weren't dead, you would ring the bell and they'd dig you up. But here in the States, they would bring you to the parlor, lie you out on the sofa for 3 days to see if you would wake up. So the parlor was the parlor until the last maybe 100 years. And during that time, funeral homes came into vogue. So then people started being buried from funeral homes, and then people started calling the parlor the living room.
This is Samuel Fitch's will, which was signed and sealed with his own blood.
Now, we don't know for certain if the pine floors went down before the Revolutionary War, because the King of England wanted all the pine boards over 12 inches shipped back to England. So they hid them in the attics. So we don't know if they went down prior to the Revolutionary War, but we do know that there still are boards up in our attic. So this room is called the keeping room. This was the original kitchen in the house. This is the room where everybody would sit. Remember, they had no electricity, so they would have one candle in the evening, one hand-dipped candle, and they would sit in here, and Father would read his book, and Mom would do her stitchery, and children would do their homework or play simple little games. Candle would go out, they'd all go to bed. They were farmers, they were up early in the morning and went to bed as soon as it got dark. So the beehive oven is here to the right behind the little black door, and it's shaped like a beehive, so it's shaped with an arched top. They would put the wood in there and get it good and hot and put the wood underneath, and that's where they would bake their bread, bake their cookies. All of the iron work is original to the fireplace, and that is where they would actually cook their meals. The keeping room was the kitchen, so it would have had a wood table, would have had simple chairs, but this would be the room where they would sit at night and rest. The other thing that was interesting about keeping rooms is they would have a half wall, and the other side of the room was called the bourning room. So in this side of the room where their one candle, the family would be. On the other side, if somebody was ill, a baby was being born, they would be in a little bed on the other side of the wall in the same room as the family. So the part of the house that you've seen previously was the original house built in 1711. There were 5 rooms. You saw the 3 rooms downstairs. 2 bedrooms above mirrored the dining room and the parlor. When the Murphys lived here, he was a farmer for trade, so he put in 5 barns. He built an ice house, which he lugged ice from the field up and kept it in straw to preserve things. And he also added on a big section of this house. So this room was called the summer kitchen, and you'll see that the stove is in a little nook and is actually in like a closet, but what's actually behind here is a chimney. So this room as a summer kitchen would have been opened up, the back would have been open, it would not have been enclosed as part of the house, it would not have been attached to the house, there would have been a little outside area to walk between the two. It would have had a big open pit where they canned all of their food, because remember, he has 264 acres, I don't think I told you that part, and he was farming a lot of the land at that time. So to preserve food, they both used the ice house and they had hired hands. So in the mid-1800s, the Murphys, who were farmers, added on a big section to the house. Again, it was for the hired hands. There were bedrooms upstairs. There were 8 to 10 men sleeping in 2 bedrooms. There was no heat. There was the summer kitchen where they canned food. This room was the woodshed, and actually when we moved here in the 60s, I was a child, and it was a woodshed, and it was just filled with wood. My dad had actually built and put windows in and made it an extension of their kitchen, and we use it as our office right now. So this area was originally a barn. It was put on as a barn when Mr. Murphy put on the area for the hired hands. Remember, they lived under a woodshed and they had no heat. So this was a 1-story barn where animals were that helped keep the hired hands warm. When the Belangers lived here, Mr. Belanger was a salesman, so he took this 1-level barn and he made it into a room. So he had parties here and he put in the fireplace. When my 5 brothers and I were in college, coming and going from college, my father raised the roof and put a bedroom upstairs. So now we rent it, we call it the Carriage House, but it really was a barn for animals. When Mr. Powers built the house, 2 of his cousins lived in the neighborhood. One lived on Great Road around the corner and one lived a couple doors down. And they came and took a lot of land from the Neshoba Indians. So when Mr. Powers built this house, he took 264 acres from the Native Americans, and there were attacks on the houses. His cousins moved in at the end of the 1600s, so they suffered more attacks than the Powers. On one occasion, there was a confrontation where one of the Native Americans was killed. So the group of Native Americans came and took a little girl named Mary Shepherd. She was 9 years old, and they incorporated her into her family. They have a belief that you take a soul for a soul, so if someone kills a member of your family, then you take a member of their family. The other interesting thing about the attacks were when the house was built, it's a saltbox colonial with a really steep roof. So when the eaves of the roof, houses of this period had an area designated for the children to go when these attacks occurred. In some homes in town, they found little beds, little chairs in an area where the children would actually go often. But this house did not have as many attacks as the neighboring houses. The Murphys lived here during the Civil War, and they added on the portion of the house for their hired hands in the summer kitchen. And during that period, they hid slaves, and they made a tunnel that went over underneath the summer kitchen and out to the corner of the house, which is where the original road was. So it was an escape route. If you go down into the tunnel, it's a crawl space. There is a wall in a closet upstairs, which my father has since put bookcases on, that was a removable wall, and it had a space just about 18 inches. And they think that when somebody came to the home and people had to hide, they would actually go up into this closet, into this removable wall. But the crawl space was part of the escape route on the Underground Railway. The first family were the Powers. And he was a minister from the town of Chelmsford, and he's the one that had the house built. He lived here from 1711 to 1732. The Fitches lived here for almost 100 years. Samuel Fitch was a yeoman, and he was a gentleman farmer. He lived here with his wife and his children. His daughter Lydia married Francis Layton, the committeeman. He was kind of the head farmer during the Revolutionary War. So he used our dining room as a tavern, and the committeemen from the neighboring towns would get together and talk about what they were going to do when the redcoats came. Remember that these were farmers, you know, they had their muskets for shooting rabbits and quail, and they would gather and talk about what they were going to do when the redcoats came. And then the next family were the Murphys, and their family lived here for almost 100 years as well. So the Wrights were next, and they didn't live here very long. The next family is the Belangers. He was a salesman. He lived here with his 4 daughters. One of his daughters, who was the young girl that was very fond of sheep and would bring them up to her bedroom for tea parties and give them baths until the well ran dry and sneak them into the smoke room for birthing their babies in the spring. And then the Caldwells bought the house with the gentleman that owned the ski area, so it was all one property. So originally this house was all farmland, and all of Neshoba ski area was part of this land. And then when the Caldwells and the Fletchers divided up the land, the ski area took most of the land, and this house just has a couple acres with it. And my parents bought it from Mr. Caldwell. We're really trying to imagine what it would have been like to live here back in the 1700s, 1800s. I know that the Days from town wrote diaries in the mid-1800s, and their life was really hard. So we're trying to reconstruct some of the time and see what it would have been like to live with no lights and no water in the house. And it's been a really fun time. We're enjoying it. Happy that I've been able to experience it.